I'm glad I went because I had another commitment. So I'm glad I went just to see your process. And how was the end of it? How did people end up making their poems? Because I left before this.
Right.
So how did they end up?
Yeah, it was very, very nice. I think people made work that surprised them. There was a lot of juxtaposition, as you can imagine, because they used found text from unlikely, unpoetic sources.
Yeah.
So a lot of people shared their work. In fact, everybody did. One student said, I don't want to share my work because I actually don't know what this means. Like, it doesn't make sense. And so that was a great thing. I'm really happy she said that because we had a nice discussion about what kind of sense poetry can make.
Okay. What kind of sense can poetry make?
Yeah, her question was great because I think we're really used to language functioning for us. It's a tool to help us communicate, to find answers, even things like directions, how to get around Shanghai. If I ask the concierge at my hotel, how do I get somewhere, I expect to receive a very clear sentence back, or I hope to.
Yes.
I feel like what poetry can do is take that language that we use for everyday and for necessity and for a certain kind of sense making, take that language and let it dance. It doesn't have to be functional. So I think it's always a great question poets ask, what sense am I making, or do I have to make sense? Mm-hmm. Often there's another kind of sense that comes through in poetry, and that is the sense of excitement or pleasure. Mm-hmm. You might hear something and you don't know what it means, but you know that it's exciting, or it sounds good, or it's quirky.
Yeah.
So that's what I think we were talking about at the end of the workshop.
You touched on two things that one of my favorite texts in poetry called. It's one of my favorite texts, but I forgot the name of the author. It's Wheelcock or Wallcock or something like that. And it's What is Poetry? And he talks about how poetry, one, it's about words. It uses tools, which is words, that we use every day. So at one point it gets mundane. At one point it has to make you hear the word for the first time again. And the second time is it has to be fun. Do you think that poetry has to be, like, it still has to maintain some of that fun in it, or no?
Fun. Fun is good. So, of course, I want to say yes.
But
because don't we want fun? But maybe I'm thinking about fun as very broadly defined. So if I link fun to pleasure or excitement, or if I have a kind of an electrical response or a visceral response, that might be related to fun or play.
Yeah.
So some of the most serious topics you can imagine, and maybe that's one of the ironies of poetry, is that poets can take things that are very painful, poets can take very serious political matters, and make something new from it. Make us feel or experience those things in a way that's electric, that's visceral. And we can't say that that's fun, because that would be disrespectful.
But it's a better word, excitement. It has to have...
Yeah.
Okay.
A little energy, a little like liveliness.
Okay. That's nice. And seeing your workshop was enlightening because it was entirely, that's not taking away from it at all, but it was entirely process, and it was about getting all of these things and seeing what comes out of it. Is that how you work? Is the process, in a way, the ends of it? Is the result of your work a result of the process, or do you have something in mind beforehand? The process is a way to get there.
Okay, great questions. Okay. And not to be sneaky, but yes to everything you said.
Okay.
So when I begin a project, and most of my work is project length, I usually write poems that are entire book length projects. I have a question usually that I can't answer. And so I research and I think about it and I take in my daily experience and I do a lot of reading around whatever's going on. And I just sit back and indulge in the process. I'm looking for language, I'm trying to make new language, I'm learning about the question I'm asking, and I take my time.
Okay.
And honestly, that process of working on a project for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years is a way to live.
Do you set these boundaries before? You talked about boundaries today, the 5-minute free verse.
Yeah.
Is that something you said before?
You know, I have written so far, 5 books have been published of mine, and I think that they take at least 5 years, 4 to 5 years to write.
Okay.
So, and I'm often working on 2 projects at once. So for me, writing, making the work, doing the research, gathering language, arranging it, rearranging it, listening for its sounds, that's living life. It's a way of living.
Okay.
Because while I'm in that project, I'm listening for information about that project.
Okay.
I'm always kind of trying to grab stuff for it. And so it does actually become a way to live. It's very exciting.
So the project, in a way, like slips into your life?
Absolutely.
When normally people would assume it would be the other way around, like life slips in. No, that's what's in your head.
Yeah, I think so. And so when you're kind of always asking a question and you're kind of always trying to collect language, I think things come your way that, I don't know, you're sensitized to them. And I think that's just a really great way to live. I guess I would say that.
How does that change your way to live when you're walking on the street or going to work?
It's interesting you should ask about walking on the street, because the current project that I'm revising that'll be published in 2019 is a book called Speech, and it is set in an imaginary city somewhere between the Midwest of the US and the Middle East. And it is about walking. It's about being a person walking in a city and not necessarily connecting deeply with others, but being with others in public space. So I have this project in mind, and so when I go walking in my city, my home city of Abu Dhabi in the Emirates, it is true that I'm noticing things, and maybe I notice things more clearly because I am working on this project.
It makes it more like rich in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I don't get tired of it. You know, like you have to take breaks, and maybe that's why I watch English Premier League football on TV.
Good.
To take a
discharge,
break. Yeah, but definitely I feel sensitized to my projects, and it kind of gives me a way to live life. Like kind of everything's an experiment.
What is the role of a city in a poet, for a poet's life and in his poetry? What role does it play that he lives in somewhere where he can see 1,000 of people where he knows none of them? Yeah,
that's interesting. Of course, there's a rich tradition of cities and writing, and we could say maybe that the whole idea in the West of modernism kind of began with the idea of the individual in the city. Baudelaire. So, you know, of course. So cities are an interesting way to be with people, and an artist encountering others in that engagement. Yeah, that's almost a foundation for modernism. So this is a great question. But cities have always been these gathering places for many languages. I always think of cities as a place, there's a line in my book, Threads, a place where languages mix and trade.
Okay.
So the origins of cities usually are about gathering spots and exchange and commerce, and there's usually a lot of mixing around. So it's a place where you can hear a lot of things from different places.
Okay.
And it's hard for me to exactly articulate.
No, because it inspires in a way. It's material, you know.
It is material, and it's a little. What I like about it is cities always challenge my idea of what's authentic.
Why so?
When I think I know what a place is or who a certain type of person is, a city will give me information that goes underneath that undermines that. I think cities always intervene in our idea of authenticity, and I think that's really important for poets. Really important for poets never to take, you know, a prepackaged ideology or a nationalism or an idea of authenticity at face value. So I think we always try to liven language, and I think it's also about making sure that we see things live, not prepackaged.
It's uncomfortable to think that you can't reside to one idea. You have to be open to the black and the white and always on the lookout for these two. but maybe it's that sensitivity in a way to see both sides that, you know. And how long have you lived in New York? Did you live in New York before Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in New Jersey, so
Okay.
that's very near to New York. My dad, when he came to the U.S. from Estonia, lived in New York. My mom's a New Yorker. And then I lived in New York City for 20 years.
Okay, and now you've been in Abu Dhabi for 4?
Yeah, 4.5.
4.5.
Yeah, 4.5.
And these are 2 big cities, different but big. So how has that, starting with Abu Dhabi, how has that affected your poetry? I've never met a poet that lives in Abu Dhabi, so I'd love to know that.
Right. Oh, this is a good question. Okay, Abu Dhabi is very, very different from New York. In New York, people are talking a lot.
Okay.
A lot. There's a lot of speech. You just overhear. And I think a lot of people in New York like to talk.
Okay.
In Abu Dhabi, you have to go in a little closer to hear people talking. You have to linger when the weather's good, take slow walks, and listen to people giving very hushed greetings to each other. It's more spread out. It's not so densely populated. There's a little bit less public street life. So that means you have to kind of go looking for life in a certain way. But Abu Dhabi is I've called it textilic. It's about a lot of repeating patterns. It was a city built in the 70s around a kind of a Gulf Arab modernism. So it almost kind of looks like Miami Beach on steroids. You know, everything's modular and repeated.
Yeah.
The sidewalks even have pavers that are in patterns that actually mimic textile patterns.
Yeah.
So in terms of visually, it's very, very beautiful. It's like really rich and repetitive.
Is that something that you use for New York as well, repetitive?
Yeah, New York is so much about work and making things that I found myself even in New York, I rarely would just stop and pay attention to architecture.
Yeah.
You know, when you're on the sidewalk, you're not noticing the sidewalk. You're like, where am I going?
Yeah.
Trying to avoid bumping into others. So I think Abu Dhabi has a lot more space around it.
Did you feel the need to get off of New York in a way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Every New Yorker loves New York and then knows how it drives them crazy.
Love, hate, yeah. Abusive relationship, yeah. I felt that.
I feel like it's very hard to be an artist in New York. And I'm really, really committed to being a teaching artist. So it's hard to make enough money to live.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was ready for a change, some more space, and yeah.
Do you think you'll go back to that abuse? Because it's the thing, you can leave, but like people are counting the time to go back.
I honestly do not know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's very strange. Yeah, we have no, apartment we keep in New York. We don't really have a two-city life, and we really don't know where we'll be next. But that's just, that's what it is.
Good. And you mentioned in class in the workshop the importance of handwriting and the movement of the hand, which is something I've never heard someone justify the handwriting for. Normally people say get off the screen, but you mentioned precisely the fact that you move your hand and you're using movement.
Yeah.
And also the importance of setting boundaries and the importance of maybe sometimes writing with others. Mm-hmm. How does an amateur poet, and the advice question will come later, but how does an amateur poet find his process in this way?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's really good to think about poetry's relationship with other things. So I don't have a traditional English department background. So
Okay.
I don't think about poetry in relation to only poetry or other poets or literature. So I have a background in gymnastics and modern dance. That's a whole other story.
Wish we had 40 more minutes.
Right, but movement is really important for me. And when I became a writer, I realized that for me, even the sound of the hand brushing across the page and this kind of movement and actually treating writing as a physical act was part of my poetics. So I think that, to look out, say you love architecture, you love cities, that's your entrance into poetry. you know, to find those connections, poetry with other things in the world. And that's what I'm always trying to do, I think. And I think also poets, I think it's important for us to get out of our own individual workspaces. We can think of poetry as a very solo activity.
Yeah, Walden-esque, yeah.
Right, but write with others. You know, if you're not in a classroom context, but you know two other poets, get together with them in a cafe and write together, because that energy in that space will be completely different.
I've written my best poetry in other classes and just doodling, like, it's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I sometimes say the first poem I actually wrote was when I was a student of sociology and social theory in a class, and the first line was, NASA invents Velcro. Because do you know that's true, that NASA invented Velcro? Yeah. Anyway, so just these strange tidbits come at you and you collect them, but when you're outside of your own little writing desk or your own environment, you get that nice input.
And what's something that you've noticed in all of your poet friends? What's something that you see in all of them? What's something that every poet has in a way? Or is there something? That might be a better question.
I like to think that a poet knows when they're getting fed a public relations line that isn't true.
Okay, you have a bullshit detector, that's okay.
Thank you, okay. Yeah. Good. And I think it's our job to see, what we do with that is every individual's choice. But like, you know, you kind of, I think poetry is, above all, it's an intervention. It's an intervention. It's,
on what?
The stream of information and language and pre-packaged ideas that come your way. I think it's so foundational. I'm also a visual artist and I love art, but if you want to get really to the heart of an intervention or find the counterculture or the underneath of an ideology, I think the poets can lead you there.
Especially in the time we are today.
Hopefully. We have to take care of ourselves too as poets, so we can't be dangerous, you know, take too many risks, and environments of suppression and censorship, those are real. So we have to sometimes write between the lines. We have to make sure we're rejuvenated. So yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah.
And New York doesn't help with that. Yeah.
A rejuvenation? It is not about that.
Now, to the question, and I thought that you can answer either, but giving advice to amateur poets or giving an advice to your younger self, which might be easier for some, but what is something that you think, especially in the ages today where people are on their phones all the time and rarely bored, what is something that you give to this generation of poet or a younger self of yours, an advice?
I would say, whatever you do in life, poetry is always there for you. So, you know, if you need to have a 9-to-5 job doing something, if you find yourself going down a path like, oh, you know, I like medicine, I'll be a doctor, it doesn't mean that you also can't be a poet. Poetry can fill in the cracks and crevices of your life in a meaningful way. So I would say you don't have to feel that being a poet is like a really special thing, that you have to sacrifice deeply for it. I think it's always there for you. That's one bit of advice. The second thing I would say is read. Like just try to find a bookstore where you are, or a library. Look online. What are people writing? Try to find poets when we make our work public, we leave, like a trail of breadcrumbs for others, like to find new language. And so I think reading is really, really important. What excites you? What do you like? You can't even explain why you like it. Try to find those texts. And then I guess the third thing I would say too is, if you find yourself really dedicated to poetry, publish your own work and the work of others. Start a small press. Make small chapbooks and give them away. I had a friend who put his poems in small chapbooks without even his name, and he left them on the steps of really expensive restaurants in New York.
Wow.
Be your own distribution model. Really be DIY, do it yourself about it.
That's inspiring, Joe.
Yeah,
I
cool,
love
good.
talking to you, so
Yeah,
thank you
this
very
was
much.
fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for your questions.
No
Excellent
problem.
questions.